quite sure there might be some contributions about regional news, because I know that's certainly an issue locally. We are overrunning a little bit, but I'm sure people won't mind because we've had such great speakers, and if it's okay with people, we'll go on a little bit after 9 so we can get contributions in. Anyway, without more ado, Mark Serwotka, General Secretary of the PCS.
Right, thanks very much. And can I say how fantastic a meeting I think it has been so far, because what hopefully is being demonstrated across the board here is whichever part of the public sector people are working in, we are affected by the government's move to privatise. And I just wanted to say something about the political context that we find ourselves in, because I think if we don't understand why the government is doing it, what our response should be, it's harder to work out, I think, how the unions can lead a campaign for something different. And I want to also deal with, if time permits, what we need to start doing in the immediate here and now. And in that sense, I want to talk about PCS's ballot for industrial action over pay and how we want to work with other unions, because the argument I'm going to make is in the here and now, if we can launch a successful fight back against pay, it opens the door in order to challenge some of the things that we heard about on the top table. So a starting point for me has to be recognising how dreadful it is. And I say that because on the TUC General Council, Jeremy and I, we often make these points, and sometimes we get lectured that don't we realise the Tories will be much worse. And we should forget that our role in life is to ensure the re-election of our Labour government. And we always say, I don't consider it to be my government. You may want it to be yours, but I think it's the most shameful government. It's an absolute disgrace what it's doing. And don't keep lecturing us about the Tories will be worse and expect us to just put up with it. And therefore, I sometimes think it's easy for us to just almost become blasé, and we hear all these terrible stories, and they are frankly shocking, and just think, well, that's the way it is. And perhaps we need to get angry and remember just how appalling what is being done to us is. So let me give you what I think is probably the worst example of all. I'm sure we all think our examples are terrible, but let me tell you something the government's about to do. The government is just launching a consultation paper on welfare reform, where it is going to tackle the welfare state. Because they decided our welfare state is far too generous, even though benefit levels are around about 10% of average earnings. They think that people are getting too much for doing nothing. So using the private sector and introducing a stick to beat people with in the most incredible way, they are about to reform the welfare state. We've got till the 22nd of October to say what we think about it. What James Purnell, the Secretary of State, is about to do is something that no Secretary of State has done since the welfare state was essentially founded in 1948. He's going to abolish income support, he's going to remove the safety net, he is going to leave us with a system where unless you are severely disabled, and if you're disabled it's not good enough because there will be hoops to jump through, unless you're severely disabled or you're actively seeking work, you get nothing. Meaning lone parents will now be forced to go out and look for work, meaning that the private sector will be brought in to force people into work because they're going to be paid by results, and I'll say something about that in a second. But probably most shocking of all, they're going to introduce workfare, where anyone who's been on benefit for 2 years will be forced to do menial tasks in the community in order to get benefit. Now, you have to almost take a sharp intake of breath and say, this can't be right, surely. Because workfare was suggested in 1985 by Margaret Thatcher and Geoffrey Howe. And the Tory cabinet, if you read your history of the welfare state, revolted, led by Norman Fowler, who at the time was dismantling many aspects of the welfare state, who said that is a step too far. The Tory cabinet rebelled and stopped Thatcher bringing in workfare. 1997, Gordon Brown considered and dismissed with Tony Blair the idea that workfare, based on failed experiments in America and Wisconsin, should be brought into this country, and he introduced instead the New Deal. The New Deal based on a partnership between state public employees trying to work with people to help people to get into the labour market. 1 million lone parents have been helped into work by Job Centre Plus staff, PCS members, not for profit, doing what they think is in the best interest of the person who is in front of them. James Purnell is now about to do what no other Secretary of State has ever done. And he is also going to bring about a new form of privatisation, probably even worse than anything we've heard tonight, because he's going to give the private sector the right to bid for anything it wants. And therefore the Green Paper will enshrine that any company can come along and bid for anything and say we can do it better. In other words, it is opening the door to the most massive privatisation of the welfare state, and they will be paid by results. So the profit motive will now be brought in to get the most vulnerable people, by definition, the people in receipt of welfare, into the labour market. And when we've had these experiments, we've seen what it does. It means that people who are paid by getting people into work will push people into any old jobs, into any old work. They will concentrate on the ones they think are easiest to place, and the ones with learning difficulties or the ones with disabilities, they will just be left. And those people now, in 2 years, will be cleaning graffiti off the walls in order to get their subsistence level of existence in government. Now, I don't know about you, but I find that truly shocking. I actually find it so utterly disgraceful that I cannot divorce at all that policy from anything the most right-wing Tory fantasists could make up. In fact, the people who support James Pennell are the Labour Cabinet, the Tories, and UKIP. And the people who oppose him are the TUC, unanimously last week, and all the charities and all the organisations. Now, I tell that story because when people say to us, "Hold your fire, you could get the Tories," I actually have to say to myself, oh my God, you know, without the Tories. So is it going to be so much worse than this? It's going to stop us fighting back? I find it hard to think what can be worse than what they're doing to the welfare state. I find it hard to think what could be worse than having more private prisons in Britain than any other country in the world, proportionately to our population. I find it hard to reconcile what we've been told tonight and think that in some way somebody else is going to be so bad, so much worse, that our job has to be to keep our heads down.